This is a $500 citation for unauthorized use of a private recreational area and another $200 for environmental contamination. The woman's voice, a grating symphony of entitlement and cheap perfume, sliced through the gentle hiss of waves against the sand. I looked up from the checkered blanket where my daughter Lily was meticulously building a sandcastle, her small plastic pail and shovel momentarily forgotten. The woman standing over us was a caricature of authority, a plus-size figure squeezed into a pastel pink polo shirt with a ridiculously official-looking embroidered crest that read Seaview Estates HOA Board of Directors. Her name tag, pinned just below it, simply said Karen President. She held out a clipboard with a flimsy piece of paper attached, her expression a mask of smug satisfaction, as if she'd just caught a master criminal instead of a father and his 7-year-old daughter enjoying a Tuesday afternoon on a beach that had been in my family for over 150 years. I slowly took off my sunglasses, letting my eyes adjust to the glare bouncing off her peroxide blonde hair. Environmental contamination? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I glanced at our setup. One blanket, a small cooler with juice boxes and sandwiches, and Lily's sand toys. I then looked at the citation she was brandishing. Under the contamination section, some unseen hand had scribbled unapproved picnic materials and fabric ground cover. I had to fight the urge to laugh. It was the most absurd thing I had ever seen, and after 25 years in the Marine Corps, I had seen my fair share of absurdity. "You heard me?" she snapped, jabbing a thick finger toward our blanket. "This is a protected shoreline, managed by the Homeowners Association for the exclusive use of our residents. We have strict rules to maintain its pristine condition. Your things are a violation." I stood up, slowly, deliberately. At 6'2", I had a good half a foot on her, and decades of discipline kept my posture ramrod straight. It was a stance that had intimidated men far more dangerous than this woman, but she seemed utterly unfazed, protected by the impenetrable armor of her perceived power. "Ma'am," I began, keeping my tone level, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," she interrupted, puffing out her chest, "is your belief that you can just wander onto private property and do as you please. This beach belongs to Seaview Estates." My jaw tightened. "This beach," I said, enunciating each word with precision, "along with the dunes, the bluffs, and the 500 acres of woodland behind them belongs to me. It has belonged to my family, the Abernathys, since 1878. Karen let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh, that's a good one. Everyone around here knows this is HOA land. It's in our brochures. Exclusive access to the pristine Seaview Beach. Now, are you going to accept this citation, or do I have to call security and have you removed for trespassing?" Lily was looking up at us now, her eyes wide with confusion and a little fear. That was the line. My daughter's peace, my family's legacy, this woman had just crossed it with cleats on. I took the clipboard from her hand, my gaze never leaving hers. I glanced at the fine, the flimsy legal jargon, the pathetic attempt at officialdom. Then I tore the paper in half, then in half again, and let the pieces flutter onto the sand at her feet. Her face went from smug pink to a blotchy, furious crimson. "You can't do that! That's a legal document!" she shrieked, attracting the attention of a few other families scattered down the beach. Families I knew, the Millers and the Garcias, who had been coming here for years with my blessing. "No," I said, my voice dropping to a low growl that had frozen platoons in their tracks. "That was a piece of garbage. And now it actually is environmental contamination. I suggest you pick it up." For a moment she looked like she was going to explode. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She stared at the torn paper, then back at me, her eyes promising a war I was more than prepared to fight. She finally spun on her heel, her sandals kicking up sand, and stomped back toward the manicured path that led to the new cookie-cutter mansions of Seaview Estates. "You will regret this," she screamed over her shoulder. "I am the president of the board. I will have you arrested. I will fine you into oblivion." I watched her go, a storm of righteous anger brewing inside me, held in check only by a lifetime of military discipline. I had come home seeking peace, a quiet life on the land my ancestors had bled for, but it seemed I had one more battle to fight, right here on my own shore. If you're watching this, you've probably had your own run-in with a power-tripping board member or a ridiculous neighborhood rule. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button because you're going to want to see how this ends, and drop a comment below telling me where you're from and what your own HOA nightmare story is. You are not alone, and trust me, there is always a way to fight back. Now let me tell you how this all started. My family wasn't just from this area, we were part of its foundation. The Abernathy homestead was established by my great-great-grandfather, a ship captain who bought the sprawling coastal acreage with gold he'd earned navigating treacherous routes around the Horn. He saw the beauty and the raw power of this stretch of coastline and decided it was where he would lay his roots. For generations, my family had been custodians of this land. We weren't developers, we were stewards. We maintained the forests, protected the dunes from erosion, and treated the beach not as a commodity, but as a living part of our heritage. My father and his father before him had a simple, standing agreement with the few local families who lived in the small town inland. The beach was open to anyone who respected it. It was an unspoken rule, a community trust. You pack out what you pack in, you don't disturb the wildlife, and you leave the place better than you found it. It worked for over a century. When I retired from the Corps as a colonel, this land was my inheritance and my sanctuary. My wife had passed away a few years prior, and I wanted to give my daughter Lily the kind of stable, rooted childhood I'd had here in the brief moments between my own father's deployments. I moved into the old homestead, a sturdy, weathered house built from timber milled on the property itself, and settled into what I hoped would be a quiet life of fixing fences, managing the timber, and teaching Lily how to fish and identify seabirds. The first sign of trouble came about a year ago with the groundbreaking for the Seaview Estates. A big-shot developer from the city had bought the old fallow farmland that bordered the eastern edge of my property. They threw up 24 oversized beige McMansions in record time, marketing them to wealthy city dwellers with promises of an exclusive coastal lifestyle. I didn't think much of it at first. I believe in property rights. It was their land. They could build what they wanted. The problems began when the houses were sold and the homeowners association was formed. Mail I didn't ask for started appearing in my box. Newsletters filled with passive-aggressive reminders about lawn maintenance and trash can visibility, things that had absolutely nothing to do with my property. Then came the welcome packet delivered by a skittish-looking man in a golf cart. It included a map of the Seaview Estates community, and my blood ran cold when I saw it. They had simply drawn a dotted line around my beach, labeling it HOA Common Area, Beach, and Shoreline. It was a blatant, audacious lie printed on glossy paper. I'd initially dismissed it as an arrogant mapping error, the kind of thing a slick marketing department would do without consulting a surveyor. I figured a simple phone call would clear it up. But I never could get a straight answer, just a bureaucratic runaround from a management company. And then today I'd met the architect of that lie in person, Karen, president of the board. As I knelt to help Lily pack up her toys, my mind was already shifting gears, moving from peacetime to a strategic footing. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, this was a calculated land grab. Karen hadn't been mistaken. She was testing the waters, asserting a dominance she believed was hers to claim. She thought I was just some local yokel in an old house, an easy mark to be bullied and fined into submission. She had no idea who I was, what I was capable of, or the lengths to which I would go to defend my home and my family's name. She had declared war on the wrong colonel. Back in the quiet solitude of my study, the scent of old paper and lemon oil polish filling the air, I began my counter-offensive not with anger, but with precision. The large oak desk, scarred with the history of 5 generations of Abernathys, became my command center. I retrieved the original property documents from the heavy, fireproof safe hidden behind a false bookshelf. These weren't just papers. They were relics. The original deed from 1878, its elegant script faded but perfectly legible on thick, vellum-like paper, signed by the county clerk of the time and stamped with a wax seal that was still miraculously intact. I unrolled the master survey map that accompanied it, a beautiful, hand-drawn document detailing every hill, creek, and boundary marker of the original 500-acre purchase. The map clearly delineated the property line extending past the high tide mark, a crucial detail known as a literal rights grant, which was common in that era for foundational coastal properties. It meant we didn't just own to the beach, we owned the beach itself down to the mean low water line. This wasn't ambiguous. It was ironclad. I spent the next 2 hours cross-referencing this historic document with every subsequent survey and tax record my family had ever filed. My father, a methodical man himself, had kept meticulous records. There were surveys from 1924 when a state road was proposed nearby, another from 1968 when the county updated its zoning laws, and the most recent one I had commissioned myself just 2 years ago as part of executing my father's estate. Each one, drawn with modern satellite-guided accuracy, reaffirmed the original boundaries without deviation. The Abernathy coastline was, and always had been, ours. My next step was to understand the enemy. I went online and pulled up the public records for the Seaview Estates development. I found the developer, a corporation named Prestige Lifestyle Holdings, LLC, and I found their final plat map as filed with the county. Laying it next to my own survey, the deception became glaringly obvious. On their map, the line bordering my property was accurate, but they had shaded the entire beach area in the same light green as their own designated common areas, like the community pool and tennis courts. There was a tiny, almost unreadable note in the legend that said, "Coastal areas subject to existing easements and ownership," a legal CYA so minuscule it was clearly designed to be overlooked. What they had done was create a visual lie. They couldn't legally claim the land on the official plat, but they could create a marketing map that implied ownership, duping their buyers and creating the foundation for Karen's power trip. This wasn't just an HOA overstepping. This was potential fraud on the part of the developer, and the HOA was its willing enforcement arm. The anger I'd suppressed on the beach began to burn with a cold, clear flame. This was a deliberate, calculated theft. They were selling a lie and using their manufactured authority to harass my family and steal my land bit by bit. My military training kicked in, overriding the raw emotion. Assess the situation, define the objective, gather intelligence, execute the plan. My objective was not just to stop them, but to dismantle their entire claim so thoroughly that no one would ever dare challenge my family's ownership again. I spent the rest of the evening on the phone. My first call was to the county clerk's office, scheduling an appointment for the following morning to get certified, court-admissible copies of every single document in my possession. My second call was to Tom Rask, a fellow Marine I'd served with in Fallujah. He'd been a combat engineer, a master of logistics and terrain, and now ran one of the most respected civil engineering and surveying firms in the state. "Tom," I said when he picked up, "it's John Abernathy. I've got a situation here. A bit of a border dispute." I could almost hear the grin in his voice. "A border dispute? John, last time you said that, it involved 2 warlords and a goat. This sounds like a step up." I explained the situation with the HOA, the deceptive map, the trespassing, the fine. He was silent for a moment, and then he let out a low whistle. "They're bold, I'll give them that. Trying to annex land with a colored map and a cranky lady in a polo shirt, that's a new one. I need a full Class A boundary survey of my entire eastern perimeter, the part that borders their development," I said. "I want it staked, flagged, and monumented. I want it so legally airtight that a team of Philadelphia lawyers couldn't find a crack in it. And I want every stake to be a clear, undeniable statement." "Consider it done, Colonel," Tom said, his voice all business now. My crew will be there at 600 on Thursday. We'll mark that line so clearly a blind man could see it from a helicopter, and we'll document every inch of it. My final call of the night was to my daughter's room. I stood in the doorway watching her sleep peacefully, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The anger in my chest softened, replaced by a fierce, protective resolve. This wasn't about a strip of sand anymore. It was about her. It was about her right to build sandcastles on the same beach her ancestors had walked, free from harassment and intimidation. Karen and her sham association had threatened my daughter's peace. They had no idea the hornet's nest they had just kicked. They thought they were fighting some quiet local. They were about to find out they were fighting a father. And there is no ground more sacred, no fortress more fiercely defended than that. The next morning I drove into the county seat, the old leather briefcase on the passenger seat holding my family's history. The county records building was a stern granite edifice, a place of facts and figures that held no room for the kind of fiction Karen was peddling. Inside, a helpful older clerk named Martha, who remembered my father, spent nearly 3 hours with me. She pulled the massive leather-bound plat books from the archives, their pages whispering with the weight of history. With painstaking care, she helped me locate the original Abernathy grant and every subsequent filing. She created certified copies, each one bearing the embossed county seal and her official signature. As she stamped the final page, she looked up at me over her reading glasses. "Everything seems to be exactly as you said, Mr. Abernathy. That land is yours, clear down to the low water mark. Been that way since before this county even had a paved road." She paused, a thoughtful frown on her face. "We've had a few calls about that new Seaview development. People confused about access rights. The developer's sales maps were optimistic, let's say." Her choice of the word optimistic was a masterclass in bureaucratic understatement. It meant deceitful, and we both knew it. I left with a thick manila envelope filled with legally unimpeachable proof of ownership. This was my ammunition. That afternoon, I sat down at my desk and drafted my first official response. I chose not to hire a lawyer for this initial communication. I wanted the first shot to come directly from me, man to man, or in this case, man to board. I addressed the letter to the Seaview Estates HOA Board of Directors, foregoing any mention of Karen's name to make it clear I was addressing the entire entity. The tone was professional, dispassionate, and utterly firm. I started by formally acknowledging receipt of their correspondence, which I put in quotation marks, referencing the citation number and date. I then stated in the clearest possible terms that they were operating under a grave misunderstanding. "The area you refer to as Seaview Beach, Ecalrebor," I wrote, "is, in fact, the private property of the Abernathy family and has been for 158 years. Your presence, the presence of your residents, and particularly the presence of your representative on the afternoon of July 12th, constituted an act of trespass." I included a paragraph detailing the historical and legal basis of my ownership, citing the original deed and subsequent surveys. I enclosed a full set of the certified documents I had just obtained from the county, including a high-resolution copy of my most recent survey map with the property lines clearly marked in red. My demands were simple and non-negotiable. 1. An immediate and formal rescission of the fraudulent fines levied against me. 2. A written apology from the board for the harassment my family endured. And 3. The board was to issue a formal notice of correction to all Seaview Estates homeowners, clarifying that the beach was private property and that any marketing materials suggesting otherwise were produced in error. I gave them a deadline of 10 business days to comply. I sent the entire package via certified mail with return receipt requested, creating a paper trail that would be admissible in court. I knew this letter would land on Karen's desk like a grenade. Part of me expected her to see the overwhelming evidence and, however grudgingly, back down. That was the rational thing to do. But I had seen the look in her eyes. This wasn't about facts or laws for her. It was about power. People like Karen don't admit mistakes because, in their minds, they don't make any. To them, being challenged is not a reason for reflection. It's a reason for escalation. I was right. Exactly 8 days later, another pristine white envelope from the Seaview Estates HOA appeared in my mailbox. I opened it, a grim sense of anticipation settling in my stomach. It was not an apology. It was a declaration of war. The letter, signed with a flamboyant, aggressive flourish by Karen Blevins, president, informed me that the board had reviewed my claim and found it to be without merit. The documents you provided, she wrote in a tone dripping with condescension, are clearly either outdated or fabricated. Our community was founded on the promise of beach access, a fact established by the developer and affirmed by our governing documents. The beach is a community asset. Then came the punch. Furthermore, your refusal to comply with the initial citation has resulted in additional penalties. Your fine has now been increased to $1,500 for continued violation and for submitting fraudulent documents in an attempt to deceive the board. Additionally, we are citing you for the unapproved installation of personal effects on common property, referring to the torn pieces of the original citation you're left on the sand. That's another $200. You have 5 days to remit payment, or we will place a lien on your property. I read that last line twice. A lien on my property. The audacity was breathtaking. It was like a mouse threatening to put a lien on a lion's den. They had no legal standing, no jurisdiction, no right whatsoever. It was a scare tactic, a brutish, clumsy attempt at intimidation, but it was also a critical mistake on their part. By threatening a lien, they were moving from simple harassment into the realm of illegal and tortious interference with property rights. They had just handed me a much bigger stick to use against them. Karen, in her blind arrogance, had not only ignored my evidence but had also accused me of fraud and escalated her threats to a level that was legally actionable. She hadn't just doubled down. She'd gone all in on a losing hand. I folded the letter, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. The time for polite letters was over. Karen had mistaken my discipline for weakness. She thought my adherence to process was a sign of fear. She was about to learn that process for a man like me is not a shield, it's a weapon, and I was just beginning to sharpen it. Phase 1, intelligence and initial contact, was complete. Now it was time to begin Phase 2, building my coalition and preparing the battlefield. The first person I called after reading Karen's masterpiece of belligerent fiction was my old friend Tom Rask. "Tom, it's John. You're not going to believe this." I read him the letter over the phone, word for word. The silence on his end was punctuated by a low chuckle that grew into a full-blown laugh. "A lien? She's going to put a lien on your property? John, this woman is a gift. She's a walking, talking lawsuit waiting to happen. She's so far out of her legal lane, she's driving in the ditch on the wrong side of the highway." "Her crew is coming at 600 Thursday?" I asked, ignoring his amusement. "My crew is already packing the truck," he confirmed, "and I'm coming with them. I want to see this magical beach they think they own. We'll set monuments that will outlast that entire cheapjack development." My next step was to move beyond my own circle and gauge the local sentiment. I spent the afternoon visiting my actual neighbors, the families who lived on the few established homesteads and small farms scattered around my land. I started with Hank Miller, a retired fisherman in his late 70s with hands like worn leather and a face carved by sea wind. He lived in a small cottage a half-mile down the road. I found him mending nets on his porch. "Hank," I said, handing him a cold bottle of beer from the 6-pack I'd brought. "Got a minute?" He took the beer, nodded me into a rocking chair, and listened patiently as I recounted the entire saga, from the first confrontation to the threat of a lien. When I finished, he took a long pull from his bottle and stared out toward the sea. "Knew it," he grunted. "Knew that development was trouble the day they broke ground, full of city money and city attitudes. They think they can just buy a view and own everything in it." He then told me his own story. The HOA had sent him a formal complaint about the commercial vehicle parked in his driveway. his 30-year-old Ford F-150 that he used for hauling his boat. Then they complained about the odor from his lobster pots, which he kept stacked neatly by his shed, 100 yards from their property line. This Karen woman, Hank spat, the name tasting like poison. She drove her little golf cart right up my driveway, told me this wasn't a working-class neighborhood anymore. I told her where she could park her golf cart. Haven't heard from her since, but I know she's not done. The story was the same at the Garcia's farm. Maria Garcia, a woman whose family had been growing produce here for 3 generations, told me the HOA had tried to fine them for their rooster crowing at dawn. They said it violated the noise ordinance, she said, shaking her head in disbelief. Our rooster. We've had roosters here for 70 years. I sent them a picture of my grandfather's deed. They haven't sent another letter, but they glare at us every time they drive by. It became clear that Karen's reign of terror wasn't limited to me. She was trying to impose her sterile suburban vision on a rural community that had existed long before she arrived. She was a colonizer, attempting to force the natives to conform to her rules. This wasn't just my fight anymore, it was our fight. But the most valuable ally came from an unexpected place, inside the enemy camp. That evening, I received an email from an anonymous address. The subject line was, Seaview Estates, I'm on your side. The sender identified themselves as a homeowner in the development who was appalled by the board's behavior. My name is Sarah Collins, the email read. I'm a junior associate at a law firm in the city. I bought a house here because the marketing materials promised a peaceful, community-oriented coastal life with beach access. What I got was a tyrannical HOA board and a president who seems to think she's a feudal lord. Sarah explained that she and a few other residents had been disturbed by Karen's aggressive tactics and the constant stream of fines for petty infractions. When my letter arrived, its contents were discussed in a closed-door board meeting, but word leaked out. Karen had apparently dismissed my certified documents as fake and railroaded the other, more timid board members into approving the escalatory response. She's lying to us, Sarah wrote. She told residents at a recent social that you were an uncooperative squatter trying to steal our beach. She's creating a hostile situation and exposing the entire HOA to massive legal liability. Your documents, if they're what you say they are, mean the developer committed fraud, and the board is perpetuating it. This is a class action lawsuit waiting to happen. She ended the email with an offer. I can't act publicly right now, as I'd be targeted by the board, but I can provide you with information. I have copies of the original marketing packets, internal board communications, and a list of other homeowners who are just as angry as I am. Use it. Take her down. I printed out the email, a surge of adrenaline hitting me. Sarah Collins was my inside source. Her testimony and the documents she could provide would be invaluable. The coalition was forming. The old guard of the original community, my own military and professional network, and now a 5th column within the HOA itself. The battlefield was no longer just a stretch of sand. It was now legal, social, and psychological. That night I drafted another email, this time to a man who owed me a favor bigger than he could ever repay. General Marcus Thorne, retired, now a senior partner at one of the most powerful law firms in the country. We had been in a tight spot in Kandahar, a command post overrun. I'd taken a piece of shrapnel meant for him. Marcus, my email began, it's John Abernathy. I hope life is treating you well. I need to call in that chit. It's not about life or death this time, but it is about principle. I'm dealing with an insurgency on my home front, and I need some overwhelming firepower. I attached a summary of the events, Karen's letters, and the email from Sarah. I knew Marcus. He hated bullies and bureaucratic tyrants more than anything. An hour later, my phone rang. John, his voice boomed, as authoritative as it had been in a command tent. I've read your situation report. This isn't an insurgency. This is a target-rich environment. Consider my firm at your disposal. Pro bono, of course. Let's give this president a lesson in the rules of engagement. The final piece was in place. I now had the surveyor, the neighbors, the inside source, and the legal muscle. Karen thought she was fighting a lone man. She was about to face an entire company. Thursday morning arrived with the pale pre-dawn light that paints the ocean in shades of gray and silver. At 5:50, exactly as promised, two heavy-duty trucks from Rask Engineering rumbled down my long gravel driveway. Tom Rask himself hopped out of the lead truck, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a set of rolled-up plans in the other. He was built like a bulldog, all solid muscle and cheerful determination. "Morning, Colonel," he grinned. "Beautiful day for drawing lines in the sand." His crew, a team of 4 highly professional surveyors, immediately set to work, deploying a total station, GPS rovers, and bundles of brightly painted wooden stakes and rebar. They worked with the quiet efficiency of a well-drilled military unit. Tom and I walked the property line together, following the path from the state road down to the dunes. "So this is the front line," he said, looking over at the silent, still darkened houses of Seaview Estates. "They really think this is theirs?" "They've been told it is," I replied, "and their president is not a person who likes to be told she's wrong." "People like that are my favorite clients," Tom said with a wicked smile. "They make the victory so much sweeter." For the next 6 hours, Tom's team conducted a masterclass in surveying. They located the original century-old monuments, a massive granite boulder mentioned in the 1878 deed and an old iron pin set in 1924. Using these as their control points, they used their state-of-the-art GPS equipment to map the boundary with centimeter-level accuracy. Then they began to mark it. This wasn't just a few flags. Every 50 feet, they drove a 3-foot length of rebar deep into the ground, capping it with a bright yellow plastic cap that read Property Corner, Rask Eng L, S number 4822. Next to each rebar monument, they hammered in a 4-foot wooden stake, the top foot painted fluorescent orange, with a sign attached that read in bold black letters, Private Property Line. Between the stakes, they ran a high-visibility yellow nylon rope. When they were finished, there was a stark, undeniable line of orange and yellow stretching for nearly half a mile, separating my ancestral land from the manicured lawns of Seaview Estates. It curved along the back of their properties and then ran straight down the sandy path to the beach, continuing right across the sand to the high tide mark. It was aggressive, unapologetic, and beautiful. Around 10 a.m., the residents of Seaview began to stir. Curtains twitched. A few people emerged onto their decks, coffee mugs in hand, staring at the sudden, garish line that had appeared at the edge of their yards. The mood shifted from curiosity to agitation. Shortly after, a golf cart came zipping down the community path. It was Karen, her pink polo shirt practically glowing with indignation. She skidded to a halt just a few feet from the rope line where Tom and I were standing, observing the final stake being driven into the sand. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice trembling with fury. "What are you doing on HOA common property?" Tom stepped forward before I could, a friendly but firm smile on his face. "Good morning, ma'am. Tom Rask, Rask Engineering. I'm a state-licensed land surveyor. We've just completed a boundary survey for the property owner, Mr. Abernathy here." He gestured toward me. "This line represents the legal boundary between his property and yours." Karen's eyes bulged. "This is a lie. You have no right. You are trespassing and vandalizing our land." "Actually, ma'am," Tom continued, his tone infuriatingly pleasant, "we've been extremely careful to keep all our personnel and equipment on Mr. Abernathy's side of the line, and these markers aren't vandalism. They're legally recognized survey monuments. Tampering with them is a misdemeanor under state law, by the way. Just a friendly heads up." He handed her his business card. "If you or your own surveyor have any questions, feel free to give my office a call." She slapped the card out of his hand. "I don't need your card. I need you and your circus off our property immediately. I am calling the police." "Please do," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her tirade. "I'd be happy to show them my deed, my certified plat map, and the license of the professional surveyor standing right next to me. I wonder what documentation you'll be showing them." She sputtered, her face a mask of pure rage. She pulled out her phone and furiously stabbed at the screen. True to her word, 20 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies rolled up. A tall, calm deputy named Miller, whose father I knew, got out of the car. Karen practically ran to him, launching into a hysterical narrative about how we were armed invaders trying to steal the community's beach. Deputy Miller listened patiently, then walked over to me. "John," he said with a weary sigh, "what's going on?" I calmly explained the situation, handing him the folder with all my certified documents. He reviewed them, his eyebrows rising slightly. He walked over to Tom, who showed him his credentials and the survey plan. He then went back to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now official, "based on the documentation I'm seeing here, this is Mr. Abernathy's property. These gentlemen are legally marking a boundary line. There's no criminal activity here." But our beach," she stammered. "They're fencing off our beach." "Ma'am, according to these official county records, it's not your beach," Deputy Miller stated flatly. "This is a civil matter. You need to take it up with a lawyer, not law enforcement. Now, I suggest you ask your residents not to touch these markers. As Mr. Rask correctly stated, that is a crime." Defeated and humiliated in front of one of her own residents who had wandered over to watch the show, Karen glared at me, her eyes shooting daggers. "This isn't over," she hissed, before climbing back into her golf cart and speeding away. As the deputies left, Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "Phase 1 of the shock and awe campaign is complete. What's next, Colonel?" "Now," I said, watching her retreat, "we wait for her to make her next, bigger mistake." I knew she wouldn't take this to a lawyer. A lawyer would tell her she had no case. Karen's ego wouldn't allow for that. She would escalate. And that's exactly what I was counting on. Karen's next mistake came less than 48 hours later, under the cover of darkness. I was woken around 2 a.m. by a notification on my phone from the new security cameras I'd had installed along the property line. I'd anticipated this. The footage, crisp and clear in infrared, was damning. It showed 2 men in dark hoodies, clearly acting on instructions, moving along the survey line. They pulled up every single one of Tom's $50 stakes and tossed them into a pile. They tried to pull up the rebar monuments but couldn't get them out of the ground, so they settled for kicking them and spray painting over the bright yellow caps. The whole operation took them less than 30 minutes. They were clumsy, amateurish, and completely caught on high-definition video, including a clear shot of the license plate on their unmarked work van as they drove away. The most incriminating part, however, was a short clip from a camera aimed at the entrance to the Seaview Estates path. 10 minutes before the men arrived, Karen's personal golf cart, identifiable by the custom pink canopy, drove to the edge of the path, sat there for a moment, and then drove away. It was a classic case of a commander overseeing an operation from a safe distance. I saved the video files to a secure server, my mind already processing the legal implications. This had escalated from a civil dispute and minor harassment to criminal vandalism and conspiracy. She had crossed a line from which there was no easy retreat. The next morning I was on the phone with Marcus Thorne's office. I was patched through to a sharp, aggressive-sounding lawyer named Ben Carter, who introduced himself as the lead litigator Marcus had assigned to my case. "General Thorne said to give you whatever you need, Mr. Abernathy," he said, his voice all business. "Tell me what you've got." I walked him through the events of the night, then emailed him the video files. There was a pause on the other end of the line as he presumably watched them. It was followed by a low, appreciative whistle. "Oh, she is a gift. She is truly a gift that keeps on giving," Carter said. "This is beautiful. We've got criminal vandalism, destruction of property, conspiracy, and the best part is the attempt to destroy legally filed survey markers. Judges hate that. It's an affront to the order of things." "What's our play?" I asked. "We play this on 2 fronts, Carter explained, his voice quickening with strategic excitement. "Front 1 is the legal hammer. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter so terrifying it will make her hair fall out. It won't just be about the trespassing anymore. It will list, in excruciating detail, the potential criminal and civil charges she and the board are now facing. We'll mention the video evidence, we'll talk about personal liability, piercing the corporate veil of the HOA, and holding each board member financially responsible for the damages and legal fees. We'll send a copy to her, to every member of the board individually, and to the HOA's registered management company. And front two? I asked. Front two is the internal insurgency. Your source, Sarah Collins. We need to weaponize the truth. I want you to have Ms. Collins, if she's willing, discreetly share copies of your certified deed and survey map with a few of the more level-headed homeowners. We need to plant the seeds of doubt and let them see for themselves that their president is lying to them and exposing them all to a massive lawsuit. We're going to flank her, cutting off her support from behind while we launch a full frontal assault. It was a classic pincer movement, a strategy I knew well. I loved it. I contacted Sarah through the anonymous email, explained the plan, and attached PDF copies of all my legal documents. Her reply was almost instantaneous. Consider it done. There's a community potluck this weekend. The rumor mill will be working overtime by Sunday. While Carter drafted his legal masterpiece, I took care of another piece of business. I drove back into town and filed a formal police report for the vandalism, presenting the video evidence to Deputy Miller. He watched the footage, his expression growing grimmer with each passing second. He recognized one of the men as a local handyman who did odd jobs for the HOA. "This elevates things, John," he said, handing me back my USB drive. "I'll have to file this with the DA's office. They'll likely open an investigation. You want to press charges?" "At this time, I just want the incident officially documented," I said. This was a strategic choice, advised by Carter. Filing charges immediately might make Karen lawyer up and shut down. For now, the threat of prosecution was a more powerful tool. We wanted her to continue making mistakes. The cease and desist letter that Ben Carter produced was a work of art. It was 10 pages long, printed on the heaviest law firm letterhead, and cited case law and state statutes that I'd never heard of. It detailed Karen's actions, from the initial fraudulent fine to the conspiracy to destroy the survey markers. It informed her that she personally, along with the HOA, was now liable for damages including the cost of the new survey, $5,000, the cost of replacing the markers, $500, and preliminary legal fees, $10,000. It gave her 48 hours to confirm in writing that all harassment would cease, that all fines would be voided, and that a full retraction and apology would be issued to all homeowners. If she failed to comply, the letter stated, a lawsuit would be filed on the morning of the third day. We sent it via courier, with signature required. I had a camera positioned to capture the moment the courier handed the thick legal envelope to Karen as she stood on her porch. Her expression, as she read the first page, was a picture of disbelief turning to sheer panic. For the first time, she looked scared. I thought for a moment that this would be the end of it, that the overwhelming legal threat, the video evidence, the sheer weight of the lawyered-up response would force her to fold. Once again, I had underestimated the incredible self-destructive power of her own ego. Her fear quickly curdled back into defiance. She believed it was a bluff. She saw herself as the victim, a brave community leader being bullied by a wealthy landowner and his fancy lawyers. She was about to make her final fatal error. She was going to rally her troops for a public stand, and we were going to be ready for her. Karen's response to the legal broadside was not a letter from a lawyer, but a brightly colored flyer slipped under the doors of every home in Seaview Estates. Sarah Collins sent me a photo of it immediately. The flyer announced a Community Unity and Beach Celebration BBQ to be held the following Saturday. Let's come together and celebrate our beautiful community and its greatest asset, our private beach. It read in a cheerful, bubbly font. Don't let outsiders try to take away what's ours. Join your neighbors for a day of sun, fun, and solidarity. It was a brazen, public act of defiance. She was thumbing her nose at our legal demands and planning to lead her entire community in a mass trespassing event on my property. It was the single stupidest, most arrogant, and most wonderful thing she could have possibly done. "She's doing it," I said to Ben Carter over the phone. "She's throwing a party on my beach." Carter's laughter was unrestrained. It's like a movie. The villain is so blinded by hubris she walks right into the hero's trap. This is perfect. This is our public forum. We're not just going to win, we're going to win in front of an audience of her own making. The next few days were a flurry of meticulous preparation. Our strategy was no longer about warnings or threats. It was about a public, decisive checkmate. Carter's team got to work. First, they filed for an emergency ex parte injunction from a superior court judge. This type of injunction can be granted without the other party being present, provided there is sufficient evidence of immediate and irreparable harm. Our evidence was overwhelming. The history of trespassing, the fraudulent fines, the criminal vandalism, and now the publicly advertised plan to commit mass trespass. We included Karen's flyer as Exhibit A. The judge granted it within hours. The injunction legally barred Karen Blevins, the Seaview Estates HOA, its agents, and its residents from setting foot on my property. Under penalty of contempt of court, which could mean fines or even jail time. The battlefield was now legally secured. Next, Tom Rask prepared a new set of survey maps. These weren't the technical documents for legal filing, these were for public display. He had one printed on a massive 6-foot by 4-foot vinyl banner, the kind you see at trade shows. It showed the entire area with the Seaview Estates lots in one color and my 500-acre property in another. The boundary line was a thick, unmissable red slash. The words Private Property, J. Abernathy, EST 1878, were emblazoned across my land. It was a visual sledgehammer of truth. Meanwhile, I worked my own network. I confirmed that Deputy Miller, who was now personally invested in this saga, would be the officer on duty in our sector that Saturday. I requested his presence to keep the peace during a civil matter, and he agreed to be there to serve the injunction. I then called the assignment editor at the biggest news channel in the nearest city. I told him I was a retired Marine colonel involved in a significant property dispute with a large HOA, and that it was coming to a head on Saturday. I mentioned a veteran's historic family land, allegations of fraud against a developer, and a community being misled by its leadership. It was catnip for a local news station. They promised to have a crew on site. Finally, I reached out to my coalition. I invited Hank Miller, the Garcia family, and a half-dozen other old-time residents to be there. I'm not asking you to do anything, I told them. I just want you to be there as witnesses. This is about our community's history, and you are a part of that history. They all agreed to come, their voices filled with a grim satisfaction. Sarah Collins, my inside source, played her part perfectly. She continued to sow discord within the HOA, forwarding our lawyer's terrifying letter to a few key homeowners she trusted. She framed it as a concerned resident. I just saw this and I'm really worried, she wrote to them. Are we really being exposed to this kind of liability? Is Karen telling us the whole truth? Panic began to bubble beneath the surface of Seaview Estates. A few residents, the ones who had read the documents, decided to skip the BBQ. But for the most part, Karen's narrative held sway. She had convinced the majority that she was their champion, fighting the big, bad landowner who wanted to steal their fun. By Saturday morning, the stage was set. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. It was a perfect beach day. From my porch, I could see the party rental company setting up on my sand. They erected a large event tent, set up tables, and rolled in massive coolers and a professional-grade barbecue grill. Around 11 a.m., the residents of Seaview Estates began to arrive, carrying beach chairs and coolers, their children laughing and running toward the water. It looked like a cheerful summer party. At the center of it all was Karen, wearing a garish floral muumui and a crown of plastic flowers, holding court like a queen. She was beaming, triumphant, surrounded by her loyal subjects. She had faced down the bully, and now she was celebrating her victory on his conquered land. She had no idea she was the guest of honor at her own public execution. At exactly 12:30 p.m., as the party was in full swing, our convoy turned off the main road and rolled down my driveway. One sheriff's vehicle, followed by my truck, followed by Ben Carter's sleek black sedan, and Tom Rask's engineering truck. We parked in a line at the edge of the path leading to the beach, a formidable, official-looking presence. The festive music faltered. People turned to stare. The trap was sprung. The walk from our vehicles down the sandy path to the beach felt like a scene from a slow-motion movie. On one side were the partygoers, their laughter replaced by confused murmurs, their bright beach towels and colorful umbrellas a stark contrast to our grim purpose. On the other side was my team, me, in a simple collared shirt and jeans, but standing with the posture of a man who had commanded battalions, Ben Carter, in a sharp suit despite the heat, carrying a leather briefcase that seemed to radiate menace. Tom Rask, in his work khakis, holding the rolled-up vinyl map like a battle standard, and Deputy Miller, his hand resting casually on his duty belt, his expression one of professional neutrality that somehow seemed more intimidating than anger. Leading the procession just a few steps ahead was the local news crew, a cameraman with a large broadcast camera on his shoulder and a reporter holding a microphone with the Channel 4 logo. They had been instructed to just film and not to ask questions until given the signal. The festive atmosphere of the BBQ had completely evaporated. The music was cut off. 100 pairs of eyes were fixed on us as we stopped at the edge of the main gathering. Karen, who had been in the middle of a self-congratulatory speech using a small portable microphone, stared at us, her face a mixture of shock and fury. Her plastic flower crown seemed to wilt in the sudden tension. "What is the meaning of this?" she squawked into the microphone, her voice echoing unnaturally across the now silent beach. "I told you people to leave. You are trespassing. This is a private party." Deputy Miller took 2 steps forward, his voice calm and authoritative, easily cutting through her shrillness. "Ma'am, I'm here on official business. Are you Karen Blevins, president of the Seaview Estates Homeowners Association?" "You know who I am," she snapped. "I am, and you are all disrupting our legal community event." "Ma'am," the deputy said, pulling a folded document from his pocket, "I have here a court-ordered temporary restraining order and injunction signed this morning by Judge Harrison of the Superior Court. It legally prohibits you, the HOA, and its members from entering, occupying, or using this property designated as Parcel 7A, the Abernathy Holding. You are all, at this moment, in violation of a court order. I am instructing you to disperse immediately." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The words court order and judge had a sobering effect. People started looking at each other, their confident smiles replaced by frowns of concern. Karen, however, was incandescent with rage. "This is ridiculous. It's a trick. He can't do this," she yelled into her microphone, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This is our beach. We have a right to be here." This was Ben Carter's cue. He stepped forward, placing his briefcase on one of the empty picnic tables and snapping it open. "My name is Benjamin Carter. I'm an attorney with the firm of Thorne, Carter & Associates, representing the owner of this property, Mr. John Abernathy." His voice was a powerful baritone that commanded attention. He turned to the crowd of homeowners. "I understand you've all been told that you have a right to be here. I'm afraid you have been severely misinformed, not by Mr. Abernathy, but by your own leadership." At that, Tom Rask and one of his crew members unrolled the giant vinyl map, holding it up for everyone to see. The visual impact was stunning. The huge, clear map with its bold red line and stark private property label silenced any remaining doubt. "This," Carter said, pointing to the map, "is the official, legally filed plat map of this area. As you can see, the property you are currently standing on is not, and has never been, part of Seaview Estates. For months, your HOA board, led by Ms. Blevins, has been aware of this fact. They have been shown the certified deeds and surveys. Instead of telling you the truth, they have lied to you, subjected my client to illegal fines and harassment, and deliberately incited you to break the law by trespassing on private land." He then held up a sheaf of papers. "These are copies of the fraudulent fines sent to my client. This is a police report for the criminal destruction of his survey markers. And this," he said, holding up the BBQ flyer, "is the advertisement for this illegal gathering which was used to obtain this court order." Karen was losing control. "Lies! These are all lies! He's a bully trying to steal our beach!" she screamed, her voice cracking, but her audience was no longer listening to her. They were looking at the giant map. They were looking at the sheriff's deputy. They were looking at the lawyer with his pile of evidence. They were looking at me, standing silently, a symbol of the history they had been told to ignore. And they were looking at the news camera, which was capturing every second of their president's humiliating meltdown. A man in the crowd, one of the homeowners Sarah had primed, finally spoke up. "So wait, we don't own the beach? We were told we owned the beach when we bought the house." Carter nodded at him. "That is correct. It appears you were misled, first by the developer and now by your board. That is a matter you should take up with them. But for today, the matter is simple. You are on private property, in violation of a court order. I strongly advise you to leave." The spell was broken. The party was over. People began to pack up their things, a low murmur of angry, betrayed conversation spreading through the crowd. They weren't looking at me with anger anymore. They were glaring at Karen. She had made them look like fools. She had lied to them. She had made them party to a crime. As the crowd thinned, Karen stood alone amidst the abandoned party debris, her face pale, her reign over. Deputy Miller walked up to her one last time. "Ma'am, the injunction applies to you as well. I need you to vacate the property now." She just stared at him, then at me, her eyes full of a hatred that was now impotent. Without another word, she turned and began the long, lonely walk of shame back toward Seaview Estates, the news camera following her every step. The fallout from the beachfront BBQ bust, as the Channel 4 news segment dramatically called it, was swift and catastrophic for Karen and the Seaview Estates HOA. The story aired that night on the 6 o'clock news and was the top story on their website by 7. The visuals were devastatingly effective. The grim-faced sheriff, the giant irrefutable map, the high-powered lawyer laying out the facts, the betrayed and angry faces of the homeowners, and most damningly the footage of Karen Blevins, her flower crown askew, screeching impotently before making her solitary retreat. The news report also included a brief, dignified statement from me. "My family has been a steward of this land for over 150 years, I said to the camera, standing on the now empty beach. "We've always shared it with neighbors who respect it. This was never about closing the beach. It was about stopping a campaign of illegal harassment and fraudulent claims against my property and my family. All I ever wanted was for the truth to be respected." The story went viral locally. It was shared thousands of times on social media. The comment section was a brutal public flogging of Karen and the very concept of the overreaching HOA. My insurgent ally, Sarah Collins, seized the moment. The day after the BBQ, she and a group of now mobilized homeowners formally called for an emergency meeting of the HOA to demand the immediate resignation of the entire board. They circulated a petition, and within 24 hours they had signatures from over 75% of the residents. The developer, Prestige Lifestyle Holdings LLC, went into full panic mode. Their name had been mentioned in the news report in connection with the misleading marketing materials. Ben Carter informed me that he received a call first thing Monday morning from the developer's chief counsel. It was not a call to fight. It was a call to surrender. They knew they were exposed. Carter, smelling blood in the water, immediately began drafting the framework for a class action lawsuit on behalf of the Seaview homeowners for fraudulent misrepresentation. The threat of a massive public and very expensive lawsuit was enough to bring the developer to the negotiating table immediately. The emergency HOA meeting was held that Wednesday night in the community clubhouse. It was a standing room only affair, and the atmosphere was toxic. I wasn't there, of course, but Sarah gave me a play-by-play. Karen attempted to defend herself, blaming me, my fancy lawyers, and a media smear campaign. She tried to portray herself as a fallen hero who had fought for their rights, but no one was buying it. The homeowners, armed with the facts and their own anger, tore her apart. They demanded to know why she had ignored the legal warnings. They demanded to know why she had exposed them all to legal action and public ridicule. They demanded to know why she had lied. Her timid board members, seeing the writing on the wall, turned on her one by one, claiming they had been misled and pressured by her. By the end of the night, the entire board, including Karen, had been forced to resign in disgrace. A new interim board was elected on the spot, with Sarah Collins unanimously voted in as the new president. Her first act was to formally recognize my ownership of the beach and issue a public apology on behalf of the entire community. The legal battles that followed were mostly formalities, a series of dominoes falling in perfect sequence. The district attorney's office, armed with my police report and the video evidence of the vandalism, brought misdemeanor charges against the two handy men. They quickly confessed and implicated Karen as the one who had ordered them to destroy the survey markers. To avoid a public trial, Karen Blevins pleaded no contest to a charge of conspiracy to commit vandalism. She was sentenced to 200 hours of community service, which, in a moment of beautiful irony, involved cleaning up public parks and beaches, and was ordered to pay full restitution for the cost of Tom Rask's survey and the replacement of the markers. She was also personally named in the civil suit. The class action lawsuit against the developer was settled out of court with stunning speed. Prestige Lifestyle Holdings, desperate to avoid further public damage to their brand, agreed to a multi-million-dollar settlement. A portion of the settlement was used to pay all of my legal fees, as negotiated by Carter. The remainder was distributed among the Seaview homeowners as compensation for the diminished value of their properties now that the private beach access was revealed to be a fiction. It was a complete and total victory. We had not just won, we had routed the enemy. We had dismantled Karen's power structure, exposed the developer's fraud, achieved legal and financial restitution, and corrected the public record. In her mad grasp for a few hundred feet of sand that was never hers, Karen had lost everything: her position, her reputation, and her financial security. She had become a local pariah. A few months later, I saw her in the grocery store. She saw me, her face flushed with shame, and she quickly abandoned her cart and fled out the door. The war was over. The insurgency had been crushed. Now it was time to rebuild the peace. In the months that followed the legal whirlwind, a quiet calm settled back over the coastline. The garish line of survey stakes was gone, replaced by the subtle, permanent rebar monuments that only a trained eye would notice. The angry private property signs came down. The beach returned to its natural state, marked only by the rhythm of the tides. Sarah Collins, in her new role as HOA president, proved to be everything Karen was not: reasonable, transparent, and respectful. One of her first official actions was to send me a formal written apology on behalf of the community and to purge the ridiculous fines against me and my neighbors, Hank Miller and the Garcias, from the HOA's records. About a month after the settlement was finalized, she reached out to me and requested a meeting. She didn't show up in a golf cart, but walked down the old public road and met me on my front porch, the same place I had first sat with Hank Miller to discuss our shared problem. She came not with demands, but with a humble request. "John," she began, "first, I want to thank you. You didn't have to handle this the way you did. You could have just put up a fence and sued us all into oblivion. You chose to expose the truth instead, and you ended up helping the homeowners as much as you helped yourself." I simply nodded, letting her speak. "The community, we're in a different place now," she continued. "The people who bought houses here for the right reasons, the peace, the beauty of the coast, they're the ones who are left and engaged. The attitude of entitlement is gone. We understand and respect that the beach is yours, completely." She took a deep breath. "But I have to ask, is there any possibility of negotiating a formal access agreement? Not based on a lie, but based on mutual respect. The homeowners would be willing to pay a fair annual fee for licensed access to a designated portion of the beach. We would agree to any rules you set. And the HOA would be responsible for enforcement and cleanup. We just want a chance to enjoy this place the way your family intended it to be enjoyed, respectfully." It was the conversation I'd been waiting for. This was not a demand for a right, but a request for a privilege. This was the foundation upon which a real community could be built. I had already discussed the possibility with Marcus and Ben. We had spent weeks drafting a document, not as a weapon, but as a blueprint for peace. I invited her inside to my study, to the old oak desk where the entire battle had been planned. I laid out the document for her. It was a formal land use and access agreement. It granted the Seaview Estates HOA a license for recreational day use of a clearly demarcated 200-yard stretch of the beach, well away from my personal residence. The agreement came with strict conditions: a significant annual fee, which I stipulated would be paid directly to a coastal conservation fund I was establishing to preserve the local wetlands; a stringent pack-in, pack-out policy with the HOA responsible for providing trash receptacles at the entrance to the path, on their side of the property line; strict prohibitions on loud music, alcohol, and large gatherings without my express prior written consent. The agreement also contained what my lawyer, Ben Carter, fondly called the Karen Clause. It stated that the entire agreement could be revoked permanently and without refund upon a single documented instance of a homeowner harassing me or my family, challenging my ownership, or showing gross disrespect for the property or the rules. The HOA itself would be responsible for policing its members. Sarah read the document carefully, her expression thoughtful. When she finished, she looked up, and there were tears in her eyes. "This is more than fair, John. It's generous." "It's not about generosity," I said. "It's about stewardship. My family has always believed this land should be shared with those who value it. The problem was never about sharing the beach. It was about the demand to own it. This agreement is based on respect, not entitlement. As long as that respect is maintained, we'll have no problems." The HOA members voted to approve the agreement unanimously. The first check to the Abernathy Coastal Conservation Fund was delivered the following week. Life on the coast found a new, better rhythm. The old-timers like Hank and the new residents from Seaview started to mingle. Hank even taught a few of the Seaview kids how to cast a fishing line from the surf. Maria Garcia's produce stand saw new customers from the development, who discovered the joy of fresh, locally grown food. The dividing line that Tom Rask had so aggressively drawn began to blur, replaced by a shared sense of place. Sometimes on a clear evening, I sit on my porch and look down at the beach. I see families, some from the old neighborhood, some from Seaview, packing up their belongings as the sun sets. I see a father helping his young daughter carefully fill in the hole she dug for her sandcastle, leaving the beach flat and clean. I see them walking back up the path, respecting the boundary, respecting the rules. Lily is free to build her own castles wherever she likes, without fear of being confronted by a woman in a polo shirt brandishing a fake fine. She knows this land is hers, not in a possessive way, but in a custodial one. It is her legacy to protect. I didn't seek this fight, but I am proud of how I fought it. I used discipline against chaos, facts against lies, and community against tyranny. I didn't just win back my land, I helped forge a better neighborhood from the ashes of a petty dictator's ambition. Justice, I've learned, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoring balance, reminding people that respect is the currency of any healthy community, and that true ownership is not about a name on a deed, but about the care you show for the land you are privileged to call home.